All right, welcome to Suturing Time, another episode here. And Phil and I had kind of an idea the other day. Phil had sent me a video on synchronicity, and we were thinking maybe we can try for some shows. We would watch videos, take some notes on it, and then have a discussion about the video. And then we can put a link to the video that we're discussing in the show notes. So if people want to go back and watch the video, they can. And then they know where we kind of got the source of the data or the source of the information that we're discussing. So the first video we watched was called Synchronicity with Christian DeQuincy. And it was from a YouTube channel called New Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Mishlove. And I hadn't heard of it, and I don't think Phil had ever probably watched one from that channel before either, but it was on synchronicity. And we had watched a video together on synchronicity, and maybe we'll dovetail that onto this one because that was like a really good video. But any comments, Phil, before we get started? Otherwise, we'll just kind of talk about the video, and I'll kind of pull the notes I have, and then we can just discuss it, I guess.
I want to make a brief comment that and pay back a 22-year-old academic incomplete, because at one particular point in my academic career, I was doing a paper for Professor Daniel Pekarsky on the possibility of a dialogue, meaningful interaction taking place between people on the internet. And I'm pretty much convinced, Dan, that we're making great progress with it. And I think if you watch the video and if you're satisfied with what we've done, then you can give me a 20-year-old A.
That sounds good. So yeah, so I guess we'll get into the video.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the video, it was the guy's name was Christian DeQuincy, and I guess he had written some books on different topics in psychology. He's a professor of psychology somewhere, and one book he wrote about, I believe, was synchronicity. So this guy was interviewing him about synchronicity, and the beginning of the video, he talked about Carl Jung, and he talked about coincidences, and basically he was saying how two events, like a coincidence, is like two events that happen simultaneously and have no connection, and that's kind of like what synchronicity is. And an important distinction he made was that synchronicity does not have like a traditional causal connection, like you do something and it causes that to happen. Rather, there's a connection through shared meaning. So something happens and you find a meaning in it. And he kind of talked about Carl Jung. I think, where was he from? Was he Swiss? I don't remember. But he's somewhere in Europe. And he had a client that had a dream that had an Egyptian scarab beetle in it. And when the patient, or when that client woke up after having this dream, there was a tapping on the window, and lo and behold, it was a scarab beetle. So to that client, that was a very meaningful coincidence. It's kind of what Jung would consider a synchronicity. And the interesting thing is that type of beetle was an Egyptian beetle that should not be, in Europe anywhere. So I don't know. That's kind of how they started. It was just kind of a background talking about what synchronicity is, and kind of like how Jung, I guess, first approached it or thought about it. So any ideas, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, actually I do. And I'm going to take something that you said to me and act like I invented it, because I think it's pretty interesting. And we were talking about something else at one particular point. I think it was some kind of a medical relationship between variables. And your point was that coincidence was not necessarily correlation. Do you remember that?
Like correlation isn't necessarily causation.
Correlation is not necessarily causation. Yeah, right. Exactly. And that gets to what we're doing here is on a transactional level. We're like sharpening our tools or something like that. I sort of had the gist of what you said, but then you can correct it, and I can say, well, yeah, then there's some space that things may exist in between causation and correlation. Did you say?
Correct. Correlate.
Okay.
Yeah. Just because two events are correlated, or two things, it doesn't have to be events, but just because two things are correlated doesn't necessarily mean that one causes the other. And that can be like a confounding thing in the medical literature. And if they don't use proper statistical techniques and everything to filter that out, then it can cause people to misapply data, I guess, to the detriment of patients.
Yeah, I know I'm getting a little excited here, but there's sort of a transactional edge as we speak. And this is firing up a whole bunch of synapses from some pretty sexy research I was doing 20 or 25 years ago. And a guy named Terry Benninger out of Harvard had written a book called The Control Revolution. And again, what I was trying to talk about with events is some sort of relationship that was between linear, like a cannonball going up and down with a trajectory that you could predict at any point, and random, no ability to project. So I think that synchronicity might live in the space between linear or random and be really an interesting and valuable tool in understanding. I mean, I have a killer example for later, but I'm not gonna talk about it till after we show the film. But yeah, this edge, this is the way I like to talk. Sometimes I'll be at a panel at a literary society or something, and I'll go like this, and the three pencil neck geeks next to me will have to duck. I shouldn't. Sorry, guys. I love you, but fact is fact.
Well, yeah, it's interesting you bring up the correlation isn't causation thing, because what Jung, according to the video anyway, one thing Jung liked to point out was that people get like overly fixated on causality. So they're always looking for a physical mechanistic cause of an event. Yeah. And I think his take was as well, there's all these things that happen that are connected, but they're, I guess you would say, acausal in the sense that you can't find a physical mechanism that ties the two events together, but there is a connection. And that connection is what, people would see as synchronicity. So it's some kind of like communication, and then I guess we can talk about that more if you want. Otherwise, though the guest, I believe, Christian De Quincey, the guest that he was interviewing, I believe he said he was a panpsychist or a pan-experientialist. So he basically thinks that there's this consciousness that's intrinsic to everything in the universe. So everything from the smallest subatomic particle, to complex organisms, multicellular organisms, to things beyond that we can't even imagine, they're all somehow in telepathic communication in a non-sensory way, not in like some kind of physical, mechanical, causal way, but there's some kind of conscious communication that goes on that can be tapped into. It's this big cosmic democracy. Any thoughts on that? Or
yeah, as a matter of fact, I do, and it's kind of a strange connection. But for about the last 4 or 5 days, I came upon an economist whose attitude I really, really liked. And so I practically devoured him. And it turns out he's from it turns out he's from a Mormon faith community, and Mormons are often belittled and belied and made fun of and trivialized. But one of the things he said was that I liked, I think, was econ was like the third thing in his life, and his God and his fellows, and I suppose if he had a bunch of them, his wives too, kept him pretty busy. but he seemed to be able to. He didn't seem to be finding self-justifying premises to critique some of the way that contemporary economics is working, and I really liked that. And then he touched on his Mormon theology. He said the only thing that he believed was that God did not stand outside of the universe, but he was in. God was in and part of, and perhaps even active in the universe. And knowing my propensity to make annoying phone calls to prominent economists, the watch out guys, I was thinking, I really got to get to know this guy. And it turned out he died of COVID in September of 2020. And I'm not saying that, I'd have to get a Ouija board or something now. But he's like a pointer that makes me think of an area of, how we criticized, for example, the Paul Krugman on inflation. We said that probably it trivialized him as an economist for anything else he said. But this guy was really describing an economic model that fueled development, which was really deflationary. And what that meant was that instead of your money being worth less, it was worth a lot more. And what the hell has the computer revolution have been about as far as information? Do you know that you used to have to pay huge amounts of money to search library databases? When I started, right before I came back to graduate school, it was like hundreds of dollars a minute, and they would have whole courses involved in using the most efficient search terms that they had at that time and algebraic operations, and you would make your career in online searching. And now pretty much you can do natural speech, voice recognition, and you can get some amazing searches. And just what I mean is some of the stuff has gotten really, really cheap and useful and functional. And that's what his argument was for what he thought economics should do. And then he went, I could go on a lot more from him. I think I'm going to have to do a program on him. But I mean, I literally stumbled onto the guy. That just just blows my mind, especially now that I've taken direct action once I realized the debilitating effect of inflation. I mean, I was listening to a German woman who she's got a YouTube seminar, and it's pretty well done, where she's talking about her retirement package and all the steps that she's doing to get to the point where she can retire 30 years from now. And I thought, well, the only thing I can say is she probably should have started 30 years sooner, because it's going to be a lot harder now.
Oh yeah. Yeah, we could definitely do a show sometime on this guy you're talking about, and maybe couple it with Jeff Booth's Price of Tomorrow, where he talks about this. It's just as you're saying, as technology exponentially improves, it should drive the production costs of goods and services down, so things should become cheaper. Yet we have this monetary policy of inflation and trying to expand the GDP, and since that inflation is one of the components of GDP, like it's just kind of like this. It's just kind of like this crash course. Something's got to snap at like a rubber band at some point. But I guess that doesn't really have a. I guess we can get back to synchronicity, but we should do a show. We should do a show on that at some point because it's very interesting stuff.
Yeah. One last point, and we're back to synchronicity. Okay.
Yeah.
My last point is to say, the last time I had my conversation with Dr. Pekarsky was in the crisis of 2008. And I told him about the incomplete at that time. And I said, but you're going to be retired. He said, oh, no, I'm not. My retirement fund's in the toilet. And just think of the whole generation of academics, professors, public employees that were expecting a retirement and are now working at McDonald's or something like that if they're lucky. But that's going to be another show, that's for sure.
Yeah, we'll definitely get back on Krugman again. He I don't think he deserves a break, but
I don't think he. I think, yeah, I think he's. I don't think the new Democratic Party deserves a break either. But we'll get to that.
Yeah.
Should we get it? We call ourselves the anti-Krugmanites.
I'm sure we could get a big group of people that would agree.
Especially retirees.
They may not have figured it out yet, but they will. Better hope they buy some Bitcoin, I guess, or something. I don't know, but
I looked that up. It was 42 today.
Okay.
It's up from there. And I asked people about Bitcoin. They say, well, that's in the toilet, isn't it? I said, well, no, it's not. I've been sort of tracking it out of the corner of my eye.
Mm-hmm.
And it's up five those points. The difference between 37 and 42, that's $5,000, right?
Right.
And I'm not getting paid by anybody to say this, by the way. Although if somebody wanted to, no. I think we better get back to what we're talking.
We better get back to synchronicity. It always comes back to econ somehow, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, especially when Brittany's.
I guess nothing touches our lives more than money, and I guess when the powers that be treat money the way that they do, I guess it just kind of makes its way into conversation, doesn't it?
Somerset Maugham, he wrote a book called "Of Human Bondage," was one of my favorite books, and I won't summarize it now either, but basically it's set in 19th century England, and he said, "Money is the sixth sense. Without it, the other five are dead."
Mm.
You know?
Yeah.
And I have these hardworking women that are practically living in their car to support their family. And I better be careful. I'll start leading a mob.
All right, back to synchronicity, Phil. All right, let's go. So what were we even talking about here?
We were gonna show the video.
Oh no, we can't do that. That would be like a copyright violation.
Okay,
but I'll put the link to the video in the show notes, and we're just
okay, good.
Yeah. So if people want to watch it, they can watch it. See if they disagree with our take on it or our feelings, or they can put any scathing rebuttal in the comments, I guess.
Well, we can always ask the guy if he wants to link his video to our website, you know.
Yeah.
Well, you gotta ask, right?
I'll let you reach out to him.
Can I be in charge of outreach for our project?
Yeah, of course.
Reach out and touch someone.
All right. Well, anyway, so we were talking about basically that like there's not always this physical causal connection, right? And that's kind of that's kind of what we were looking at. And De Quincey kind of touched on how, everything, reason can't solve anything. And this is like an overarching theme that has come up on things we've discussed, but it's kind of like domains of reality transcend what reason can achieve, right? So the edge of reason is not necessarily the edge of reality. And that's kind of what this gets to, is this connection of these events, right? So reason can get you somewhere, but it can't necessarily make the leap from here to synchronicity, in a way, if you want to think of it that way. So like one way that he kind of thought about it was like precognition. He doesn't believe that you actually see something. You don't actually see the future, because logically you can't do that because the future hasn't occurred yet. So De Quincey thinks it's more of an intuitive process. So it's kind of like you're tapping into this universal consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. And it's like an intuitive process where because you can tap into this consciousness, there's all these different probabilities, and you're just kind of reading the projection of the possible, of all the possible outcomes, and kind of coming up with a probability of what you think will happen. And that's kind of what you have, like this ability to tune into this consciousness that's kind of higher than the consciousness that we think of. And by tuning into that, you're just kind of like forecasting. You're like a super predictor, forecaster. You're not actually seeing the future, but you're just projecting what the possibilities are based on tapping into this kind of like super consciousness or something. Is that kind of?
Yeah. That too was one of the best parts of the video that I heard, that I really liked. And of all things, I confess I have a certain fondness. It's not fondness, it's respect. There's a certain affinity for Putin. And I have to be careful where I say that, because there's a bunch of Ukrainians that live in this part of the country. But nevertheless, they asked him about the possibility of a nuclear war with the United States. And he said, that is a reality which has not taken place yet. That is a reality that something about, I cannot predict the future. But what you might be able to do is look into another domain, another dimension where that happened. And maybe that's what a writer with his creative mind can allow you to, think about the unthinkable, basically. This is like, well, why would it be different? What if it happened? Well, let's teach those Russians a lesson, And then in that reality, we have an incinerated planet, or let's say you can take as many as you want. I mean, alternative history is they call it Uchronics, and people actually study it pretty seriously. And you could talk about thought experiments. My dissertation was a thought experiment. Einstein did thought experiments. And you don't really have the stuff to make the equipment work. Like you don't have the streetcar that goes to the moon or something like that. That was one of his faster than light experiments. I think I'm not doing quite justice to it. But you can create a world in your mind, or maybe touch on a world where it is true, like the Beatles song, Just Imagine.
So yeah, so it's kind of
just imagine if God was a great big chicken, like we said that one time.
Right. Well, so it's kind of like one thing I see in this stuff that's kind of interesting, because it's stuff that we've talked about before, not on the show per se, but this like consciousness that people are tapping into. This De Quincey talked about how your brain has this filtering mechanism, and there's like so much information coming in that you filter out 99.9% of it, because it's just coming at us so fast. And what like I believe what he's getting at is like Jung and shamans, and believe we can by some way somehow access all that unfiltered information that consciousness
Mhm.
by kind of opening little sluices in the filtering mechanism. And it seems to me, and I can't remember exactly, but I believe like Albert North Whitehead touched on this kind of stuff through process philosophy, like this filtering mechanism. And I think it would be fun to like study more about this filtering mechanism at some point.
I got some real good notes on him that a former friend of mine did for me, but I own the notes and I'd love to do that.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of a neat perspective, I guess. And then he went on to talk about something called apophenia, which I'd never even heard of, but it's basically just the projection of meaning into events in which there's actually no meaning there. So it's kind of like how schizophrenics see messages and all types of things, like they think it's like a message from an alien or God or whatever. And so he used that as a kind of like a segue to talk about the difference between an experience and how we interpret it. So, how relying on our belief systems can kind of get us into trouble when we interpret experiences. So, like if something has symbolic meaning, it involves interpretation, but the synchronicity is kind of more like a experiential meaning. So you're kind of focused on the fit between the self and the non-self, because nobody kind of wants to be a misfit. You want to fit in. So there's this kind of weird razor's edge between where like schizophrenics, see messages and all types of things and want it to have this symbolic interpretation, or like they overly rely on the interpretation, whereas like shamans or something see things more as an experience and just kind of tapping into the non-self and looking for a connection between the two. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad you brought up apophenia, because as I was preparing for the show, I sometimes wonder about myself. I see connections that maybe I have to work really hard to explain to someone else, where they just don't see it. And sometimes I'll succeed and sometimes I won't. And if I don't, I can get very frustrated. But I always have to remember that what you can work. I mean, communication is a really hard job, and we have like in thinking fast and thinking slow. Danny Kahneman points out that most people don't listen to what you say. Most people are only giving you a small part of your consciousness. And if you're constructing to communicate, part of the problem is you have this thing. It's like something that's inside your mind, and you're like apophenia. I mean, that's another way of saying, well, it's a form of madness in a way. And I wonder if I have it. And I don't think I do, but at least I got a word for it now. And maybe before there's a word for it, I mean, I think there's many things you got to have a word, and if not a word, something else. Maybe like, I don't know, a sign, like a road, like a sign of a car going off a cliff or something like that. I'm not sure, but I think it's real.
Yeah, well, I wonder if it's somehow tied to this filtering mechanism that they all keep talking about.
Well,
It'd be fun to research more into that.
Einstein also said that a lot of that the 4-year-old mind is very open. And if my wife had a PhD minor in Chinese, and I had to talk with her Chinese teacher once because I couldn't learn it, and she said, is easy. Little children learn it, you know, and those filters go along with the idea of neurological pruning. You know, that you'll have, in order for certain areas of the brain, all areas of the brain can't develop equally. It'll burn out, and so some of those some of those cells they deactivate. Now, I'm thinking about what you said about Young and getting to the thing, I guess I would call it. You know, the I'm not quite getting it, am I? I know what I
No,
want.
no, I know what you're getting at. It's kind of interesting. It's kind of like who knows what Jung would say, but it's kind of like this filtering mechanism.
Yeah,
It would be interesting to like look at it or just explore it from a perspective of cognitive biases. Because
yeah,
if you look at, I mean, cognitive biases lead people to make very poor decisions.
yeah,
And everybody would like to like not make decisions that are influenced, that fall prey to cognitive bias.
yeah,
But they, like the cognitive biases are basically result from your brain's attempt to simplify information processing because there's just too much information to process. So your brain has to take shortcuts, and that's where these biases come in, whether it's hindsight bias or anchoring or whatever, confirmation bias, whatever. It's all basically stemmed from your brain trying to take shortcuts in how it processes it, because otherwise it would just be absolutely overwhelmed. So I think maybe the next show we should do, you sent me the first video you sent me on synchronicity, was that one where it was an interview of Kirby Paradise,
yeah.
and it was a two-part video, and it was a while, but maybe we should watch it because it was really interesting how he kind of tackled this
Mm-hmm.
question. And he talked about shamans that use ayahuasca, and
Yeah.
how
Oh,
that
yeah,
would
yeah. I
basically
remember
like
that. Yeah.
it would basically like let you see a lot of the information that your brain is filtering out. And now like
Oh,
you couldn't
okay.
you couldn't use it all the time, or like you're saying, you like burn your brain out. But he was talking about like microdosing, and he microdoses it at night. And it was just kind of interesting. Like, I don't remember all the specifics, but it's kind of a way of getting a look behind, or a look into this filtering mechanism, and seeing stuff that your brain normally filters out of necessity, because it would just burn out trying to process
Yeah.
everything.
Uh, it's and what's filtered out is sort of like an archaeology. To model that which is filtered out. You might think of it like an archaeological midden or something like that. It's like the stuff they throw into the pit every night for 1,000 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
And if you happen to find a Colt 45 or something like that in that midden next to King David's spear, then the relationship would be interesting. Meaning would come. Meaning comes out of relationship. That's one of the things that Whitehead really privileged. That an occurrence is a bumping up against two entities, creating a third space, kind of.
Mm.
And I think that I think we could do that. I'd love to do that. I mean, a French guy, Michel Foucault, who I love to despise, has a whole theory of archaeology of knowledge, which is extremely useful. I mean, for gosh sake, Milton Friedman said, in times of crisis, theories that are laying around are picked up. Mine happened to be one of those. I mean, if you think about that, theories, some of them crazy, some of them terrifying, some of them brutal and racist, get picked up in crisis. Where are we in America now, right now? And what's all this weird shit that's floating around where we're calling rioters patriots, you know?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And part of it too, you wonder, it's kind of like, I remember at the tail end of when I was working, it was just you were flooded with so much information that I think everybody's filter, as this guy, in the video described it, everybody's filter is just overwhelmed. So they're looking for anything to grab onto to make sense of what they have a hard time processing. And that's where, people with not the best motives enter. And then they're willing to latch on to like QAnon or just, batshit crazy stuff because they're overwhelmed and they just want something that I guess they can fixate on and just let, just ignore all the massive amount of information.
What this ask Trisha about this poem. It's by William Butler Yeats. It was written I think in 1922 during the Irish War of Liberation from the British. And it's called Slouching Towards Bethlehem. Jan does a magnificent reading of it. I'm not going to ask her to do it right now because she just got back from the foot doctor. But maybe another show we'll get in on, because that's exactly what Yeats catches in this poetic instant that's hard for us to catch because it's so complex, and yet you sort of know what he means.
Yeah. Well, what do you think? I mean, I think we got an idea for our next thing. I think if you don't mind, I think we should watch those videos with that Kirby Paradise and just kind of extend this discussion and look at how he kind of sees this information flooding and filter and synchronicity. And, he had written a book on it, and he talks about how he microdoses ayahuasca. I know we're kind of getting a little bit out there, but it's kind of really interesting to see different perspectives on things.
Well,
and, I guess having worked in the medical system for a long time, you kind of see how these information leaks its way into the healthcare system. And so I'm a little bit more like open-minded about things because like some of the stuff that has made its way into mainstream medicine can't be on, it's probably on like as much of a clay foundation as anything else. So it'd be interesting to explore this stuff a bit deeper.
Absolutely. And this idea of scraping away the filters, so to speak. This is straight Martin Heidegger mainstream philosophy. And if you voicemail me, you'll get Phil Caveney, phenomenologist at large. And what you were describing. Now here I have to be careful of the word. A connection between what we're talking about and a 20th century German philosopher, Husserl and Heidegger. We don't say they seem to be connected, and we might not even pursue the connection because we can't. But we know that these sort of ideas turn up. They're generated somehow, and I don't know. I don't know how, but I could do a big long academic paper on it. Luckily, I'm not going to.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, should we sign off, Phil?
Okay.
All right, let's sign off.